Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's commentary. What unfolded on December 1st, 2025, was not merely another headline in the endless churn of global news. It was a moment that snapped the attention of every foreign ministry, every intelligence agency, and every newsroom across the world. Reuters published a report that instantly echoed from Brussels to Moscow, from Washington to Beijing. According to this report, Russia accused NATO's highest-ranking military officer of making an extremely irresponsible suggestion, one that implied the alliance might consider a pre-emptive strike under the banner of defensive action. This was not a rumor, not an off-the-record whisper, and not an online distortion. It came directly from Admiral Giuseppe Cavo Dragone, speaking openly to the Financial Times. He argued that NATO must rethink its posture in the age of hybrid warfare, and that, under certain circumstances, striking first could be interpreted as an act of defense. Single phrase, preemptive strike, landed in Moscow like a thunderclap. Within hours, the Russian Foreign Ministry denounced the remark with unmistakable alarm, claiming it revealed NATO's drift toward deliberate escalation. To the Kremlin, this was not a theoretical discussion about deterrence. It was a signal, and signals between nuclear-armed rivals do not stay contained in the polite world of interviews and press releases. They seep into military planning rooms, into early warning systems, into strategic assessments about adversary intentions. They shape the psychology of conflict long before any conflict erupts. From a Western security perspective, some analysts interpreted Cavo Dragone's remark as an attempt to modernize deterrence. The world has changed dramatically. Conflicts no longer begin with columns of tanks or the explosion of missiles streaking across the sky. They begin in servers, underwater cables, satellite networks, and information ecosystems. Hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, sabotage operations, drone incursions, disinformation campaigns has become the preferred tool of states seeking to weaken rivals without triggering open war. NATO officials have repeatedly expressed frustration that Russia operates just below the threshold that would trigger Article 5, conducting actions that are harmful enough to disrupt but deniable enough to avoid direct retaliation. In Cavo Dragone's view, if Russia is constantly active in this gray space, then NATO should consider options in that same space. Perhaps a strike on a cyber unit or the interception of a covert maritime operation might be necessary to defend the alliance. But to Moscow, this is not technical doctrine or academic theory. It cuts to the core of Russia's strategic worldview. The Kremlin already sees NATO as expanding towards its borders, absorbing former Soviet-aligned states, deploying troops and missiles ever closer to Russian territory, and supporting Ukraine with intelligence and weaponry. When a NATO commander speaks about the legitimacy of a first strike for defensive reasons, it confirms Russia's worst suspicions, that the West is normalizing the idea of hitting Russian assets, Russian infrastructure, or even Russian territory itself. Put yourself in the mindset of a Russian general sitting in a command bunker outside Moscow. You know that NATO outspends you dramatically. You know that NATO aircraft, ships, satellites, and surveillance systems surround your borders. You see NATO providing Ukraine with real-time battlefield intelligence. And then you hear a top NATO admiral suggest that preemptive actions may be justified based on ambiguous hybrid threats, threats that Russia defines in an entirely different way. In that moment, this is not rhetoric, this is a warning. This is where the United States enters the frame. Because no matter how NATO structures its command, the alliance ultimately revolves around American capability and American political will. Without U.S. support, no preemptive concept could mature into official doctrine. Without American resources, no operation could be executed. And without American approval, no member state would dare escalate in ways that could ignite a confrontation with Russia. This is why the world is now asking whether Cavo Dragone's statement was a rogue improvisation or the first clue of a deeper shift in Washington's thinking. The White House has remained deliberately vague, offering the kinds of phrases that diplomats use when they want to signal firmness without committing to any. Specific, robust deterrence, hybrid resilience, collective defense in all domains. These words can mean improved cybersecurity, or they can mean something far more kinetic. Inside Washington, two instincts are colliding. On the one hand, the U.S. military establishment is deeply aware of how easily a NATO-Russia miscalculation could spiral into nuclear confrontation. Generals who have run simulations know that even a limited conflict in Eastern Europe often escalates toward catastrophic scenarios in a matter of hours. They know that ambiguity can be a dangerous tool to wield. On the other hand, American leaders feel pressure to deter Russian aggression in the gray zone. For years, Russia has launched cyber intrusions, disrupted critical infrastructure, sabotaged undersea networks, and experimented with covert influence across Europe. If the United States appears passive or indecisive, it risks signaling that NATO's deterrence has cracks Russia might exploit. Washington may not have authored Cavo Dragone's words, but its refusal to clearly reject them has created a vacuum filled with interpretation. And in geopolitics, interpretation is power. When the United States falls silent, allies read hope into the silence while adversaries read fear. Across Europe, the reaction has been divided. Frontline states such as Poland, Estonia, and Lithuania privately welcomed the tougher language, arguing that Russia only respects strength and that ambiguity is necessary to deter Moscow's relentless hybrid pressure. Western European powers like Germany, France, and Italy reacted with far greater caution. They worry that rhetorical escalation could quickly turn into real escalation, especially if Russia interprets NATO's new language as preparation for offensive action. For Russia, however, the matter is simpler. Moscow believes that NATO's voice is merely the American voice spoken through European tongues. The Kremlin does not believe in spontaneous multilateral shifts. It believes in hierarchy. If a NATO admiral speaks of preemptive defense, Russia assumes Washington approved it, or at least tolerated it. And this reinforces the long-standing Russian belief that NATO seeks dominance, not stability. This is why Cavo Dragone's remark feels like more than a stray sentence. It intersects with a rivalry where both sides hold strengths that matter enormously under the shadow of nuclear weapons. On paper, NATO's conventional superiority is overwhelming. The alliance's combined defense spending dwarfs Russia's. NATO possesses vast industrial capacity, advanced aerospace technology, and a global network of bases that gives it unparalleled reach. In a prolonged conventional war, NATO would outproduce Russia many times over, but those spreadsheets of power overlook crucial realities. Russia has geographic depth, border proximity, rapid mobilization ability, and a military doctrine deeply intertwined with nuclear escalation.
Russia does not need to project power across oceans. It only needs to defend territory near its own frontiers. And its nuclear posture, especially its doctrine of potentially using tactical nuclear weapons to de-escalate a losing conventional conflict, means that NATO's superiority might actually increase the risk of nuclear use rather than reduce it.
Russia's air defenses are among the most advanced in the world. NATO could achieve air superiority eventually, but any deep strike into Russian territory would encounter layers of S-400 seconds, S-500 seconds, radar networks, and anti-access systems that are designed to complicate the early stages of conflict. Russia's massive artillery forces, electronic warfare units, and hardened defensive infrastructure give it additional advantages in any high-intensity engagement near its borders. Meanwhile, hybrid warfare adds a layer of unpredictability. Russia is more agile in the shadows, unrestrained by alliance politics or complex legal frameworks. NATO, despite its power, is a bureaucratic giant. Russia, despite its economic strain, remains nimble in covert and cyber operations. This asymmetry is why Cavo Dragone's comment feels to many analysts like an attempt to rebalance the playing field by suggesting that NATO might also act first in the gray zone. But that attempt, whether intentional or accidental, has triggered consequences that are now unfolding rapidly. Moscow's response was immediate and sharp. Russian officials accused NATO of preparing attacks under the guise of defense, framing Cavo Dragone's words as evidence that the alliance is abandoning restraint. But in Russia's political culture, rhetorical condemnation is only the opening act. The Kremlin's next steps will include increased air patrols over the Baltic region, snap military exercises in the Western MI, Literi district, redeployment of missile units to areas like Kaliningrad, and heightened naval operations in both the Black Sea and the Barents Sea. These actions serve two purposes: projecting strength outward while reassuring the domestic audience that Russia is not intimidated. Simultaneously, Russia will escalate hybrid operations, more cyber attacks on European networks, probing actions targeting communication lines, and increased pressure on undersea cables. None of these moves will be officially acknowledged. Instead, Moscow will deny involvement while accusing the West of staging provocations. The shadow war will darken, accelerate, and become more volatile as both sides feel pressure to signal readiness. On the diplomatic stage, Russia will intensify its efforts to strengthen ties with China, Iran, North Korea, and a wider group of states that are weary of Western power structures. It will present NATO as the destabilizing force, using Cavo Dragone's quote as the latest proof that the alliance is drifting toward aggression under American direction. All of this leads to a sobering conclusion. Every step taken in the aftermath of a single sentence has tightened the spiral of escalation. NATO signals determination. Russia signals defiance. Both claim they are defending themselves, and the gray space between peace and conflict shrinks further each day. Unless a deliberate effort is made to break this feedback loop, that shrinking space may become the fault line of the next great crisis. Thank you for watching.